Hello and welcome to the Cheeky Science Show. In this video, I'll tell you about README files, a lab tip to help your future you. So, have you ever looked back at some of your results and wondered, how did I analyse this data? Where did these results come from? Or looked at a figure and gone, how did I generate this? What did I click on to get to this position? Or looked at your Western blot scan and wondered, what exposure did I use for this? Now, some of these points might seem trivial, but how handy would it be if there was a file in your directory for each experiment that actually explained what each of the files contain and how you got to that position and how you generated that data? Well, why don't you consider generating a README file? So, the point of a README file is to have all of this different information in one location that is in an area that contains all of the different figures, data points, and analyses in the same directory. And so the point of the README file is to serve as a reference that you can come back to a year later when you can't remember the exact details of how you processed or generated these files. So what would be inside a README file? So it includes, the simple things like, what did I click on to process my images? What concentrations of the small molecules in my experiment I was using? And how long did I do something in my experiment? And how did I actually process my data? So the point of the README file is to kind of explain in detail, or enough detail for yourself, of what is in each of your files in your directory. And so the purpose of this is that you don't clog up the actual data files that have the kind of useful information, but this README file is still going to be there. So if you come back to your data a year later, you can go, oh yeah, that's how I did it. And off you go again. So there are many different formats that you can use for your README files. I've simply used WordPad here just because for me it's simplistic. All I need to write down is prose. But if you wanted to put in coding, if you were using RStudio, for example, you can then make R markdowns. And so you very much, you can, the idea is the same. It's just you format it in the way that you want to use it, that is most beneficial to yourself. I actually quite like how simple this WordPad is, also because at the top you can see it's got this date and time panel, which inserts the right date, so I haven't got to keep making different versions of my README file. I can just extend the file that I've already got. And also, it saves the file as a text file, which means that it can pretty much be opened in many different applications, should one of these applications close down or go bust. So if you're not yet convinced that making a README file will be beneficial, then let me show you the graph. And so this is a graph I recently saw in a different YouTube video that was titled "The Graph That Changed My Life." And basically this graph goes into the idea of delayed gratification. And so if we take a look at this graph, like making a README file, it takes energy. It takes energy to be organised, which is why often we don't want to do those tiny little details and write them down on our lab book or make good copies and back up our data, because it takes time, right? It takes energy, it takes time. We just want to sometimes go home, have a cup of tea. And so, we do these things that in the moment give us like that positive, good life feeling. But later on, as we well know, we come back to it and we go, hang on a minute, I don't really know what I did. And it has negative long-term consequences. However, if we do the other side, we make the README file, yeah, sure, initially it's going to be a bit annoying, but we come back a year later and we go, wait, I'm so glad I made this file. And if you do this for all of your directories, then no matter what you come back to, you've got a good starting position. And so help your future self is the lesson from today. And so make some README files. Thanks for listening.